Welcome back, Mr. Goodberry. The First Star Logistics studio is fully equipped and ready to record.
Welcome back to Bengals on the Brain, presented by First Star Logistics. I'm your host, Joe Goodberry. Happy 4th of July as we go through the 25-year Bengals team. Remember, it's 2025. We're doing a 25-year team, mostly Marvin Lewis era, little Zach Taylor, but they had to have appeared in 25 games. That's important for a couple guys here that had some stints. We're going to do linebackers today and special teams because that'll give us about 15 guys to talk about. We have 18 guys to talk about when we get to defensive backs. So it is going to be split into 2 episodes to finish us off, just because there's a ton of players that are worth mentioning. Defense is a little bit different because so many guys get rotated in, right? The offensive line, are you a starter or not? Those guys are typically going to make the team. But we had guys on the defensive line like Wallace Gilberry that were role players their entire career. Worth a mention. I wanted to bring Wallace Gilberry up. I think we've got one guy like that at least at linebacker. And then in special teams, we've got kicker, punter. I think those will be pretty simple. But maybe even debatable at kicker. I don't think so. But then kick return will be at least interesting to talk about because, again, we're trying to build a 53-man roster. So you had to have made the team to be one of the return men. And luckily we have one of those. So let's dive in and look at this special teams and linebacker unit. Starting off with kicker, we're going to bounce around a little bit here because I think we can settle special teams pretty quickly. So look on the left side here. Kicker, it says 3. Those are 3 special teamers that I'm keeping. Kicker, punter, long snapper, right? The punt return, kick return is somebody that made the roster. So little spoiler there for the next episode. But I'm going with Evan McPherson at kicker over Shayne Graham. This is actually debatable. Shayne Graham was a very, very good kicker for the Bengals for many years, longer than McPherson has been. To me, separate this. So I think Graham was a little more accurate. Graham's actually coached McPherson, which is interesting here. The big difference to me is how the game has probably evolved. And if I want a guy to play right now, and I know that I haven't used this logic for every position, I think it would apply, though, if we were playing in 2005, 2015, or 2025. And that's kind of how I justified McPherson over Graham. McPherson can hit those 50-yarders. And 50 plus, the 58. He can hit a 60-yarder. To me, that's a big difference. Graham struggled earlier in his career. He was at 50, 52. He was fine. They never would kick 53, 54, 55, 56. Any of those, the Bengals were punting the ball or trying to go for it on 4th down. And while Graham was extremely accurate and probably more accurate than McPherson, I think McPherson is better from distance with the potential to be just as accurate as Graham was. We've seen McPherson go through stretches where he's been money, right? And he has been dead on. And I think we can get that back again. So those are the 2 guys worth mentioning. And I'm going to go with McPherson. If you want to go with Graham, like John Sheeran did this, and I saw that first, and I was like, man, he's got Shayne Graham over, and his logic makes sense, and I get it. Kevin Huber, though, to me is the punter, hands down. I don't know that there are too many guys worth mentioning that are even close. I think even mentioning some of the guys like Kyle Larson and there was one other guy, but it does injustice to Kevin Huber's name to punt for largely this entire span and have field goal kickers routinely become good players because he's the holder for them. He was the captain on special team. He was the captain, I think, for a few years at the end. And then Clark Harris at long snapper. Again, super long. Kevin Huber and Clark Harris, I've got a picture of them I want to say it was a preseason game in 2008 or 9, whatever the first year was. I think it had to be, no, it was 2010 because Owens was on the field, Chad was on the field. So 2010, Harris and Huber were out on that field with Owens and Chad, and they end their careers with Burrow and Jamar Chase. So think about that from Carson era. So we're starting the first set to ending with the last set of the exercise we're doing over this 25 years. Those 2 were great at what they did. They were very, very good players. Now, I don't know that any of these guys are Ring of Honor. Maybe if McPherson goes on another playoff run and they win a Super Bowl, eventually he would get there. But again, remember, this is just the last 25 years. If you're bringing up Jim Breach, he does not qualify. I've seen some people bring up in comments, I don't know if they're just bringing the player up Like I saw someone say, Tim Crumry is the best nose tackle they ever had. I agree. This is just the last 25 years. We're not, you may just be bringing him up because, hey, let's mention Tim Crumry as much as possible. Bengals Ring of Honor as of last year. Was it Dillon and Crumry last year? I think it was. It was a good class. Moving on to kick return, punt return. I think this is a more interesting one. I go with Adam Jones for multiple reasons. Not only was he dynamic as a kick returner and punt returner, mostly punt return. That's the thing. He did have some kick returns and did have some success kick returning, and he did in his career, throughout his career. But Jones was mostly in rotation with Brandon Tate, who you'll see down at the bottom there. Tate was more of the safe return man, and when they needed a play, they'd put Pacman back there, and Pacman never fair caught the ball at all. He hated it. He would somehow avoid the hit too, because like there were times where I'm like, he's gonna fair catch this one. Nope, he's not going to. He just want to catch it for some of those, but other ones, when he caught it, he'd be very, very hard to get a hand on. He was very elusive for a cornerback. Typically, you see that type of stuff with receivers, as we'll see with like Peter Warrick down there. Very elusive player, right? But Pacman had the guts, right? The toughness, the speed, and the elusiveness to be, and you need vision, and he definitely had that clearly. But Pacman being a Pro Bowl return man gets the nod here. Plus, he makes the roster. The other guys like Brandon Wilson have the best kick return average in Bengals history. I can't with enough returns, right? You always got the guys that have one or two returns and beat them out, but with enough returns, Wilson is the best one they've ever had there. And it was a short period, and he doesn't make the team anywhere else. I'm not just going to keep a return man on a absolutely star-studded roster. Peter Warrick, again, punt return wise, probably could go blow for blow with Adam Jones, and he's not making the roster anywhere else. So I can't do that. Although did we have an honorable mention for Warrick? I think we did at receiver. We had a lot of honorable mentions. Warrick did get that. So he would have been close. He would have been the next guy if I were to rank these grade players again, and probably be Warrick number 2. And then Brandon Tate, who could kick return and punt return. He was a spotty receiver, did a little bit of it, did a little bit of punt gunning, not really though. And was a frustration period for the Bengals fans, I think, watching him, because there was always Adam Jones there. There were other players on the team that were like, why aren't they returning? I'd rather see them than Brandon Tate get his 8 yards. And then Tate would rip one off or have a one-handed catch. He'd make a play just when you reach your breaking point. Brandon Tate would make a play and you'd go, all right, let's keep it moving. So those are the return guys. I do think it's worth probably mentioning, who would be like the gunners, who would be your core special teamers. A lot of them would be linebackers more than likely, and tight ends. And a lot of these guys did not play special teams. So it's an interesting thing to look at. If you're a big special teams guy, looking at this roster and going, all right, so who's going to be your punt gunner? Who's going to be, it'd be safeties and linebackers and corners more than likely. And we will get to that in the next episode. I think we'll touch on it just a little bit of who would be that and who would, because Brandon Wilson would have been. He was a solid special teamer other than just a return man. But let's move on to linebacker. It's what we're here for this episode. It's what we're going to spend our most time on. I have listed as 3 outside linebackers, 2 inside linebackers. Really, some of these are very interchangeable. This 25-year team happened at the culmination, the inflection point of teams going into their nickel packages and starting basically only 2 linebackers, and outside and inside. And you ended up being both guys need to be inside linebackers, but have the ability to run and cover and get to the outside and play those responsibilities as well. So while I listed it like this, I'm not very strong about where everyone's playing in this. It doesn't have to be where I list it, but I thought there was at least some talking points here. The 2 starters for me, the 2 guys I think were the best talents the Bengals have had at linebacker, are Takeo Spikes and Vontaze Burfict. I'm going to start with that as 2 starters. And oh my God, would that be crazy to watch? Because let's start with Spikes. Built like a house, right? Absolutely large shoulders, thick neck, the thickest neck you've ever seen in your life. Great tackler, played with intensity and passion and leadership. I wish he would have played his entire career as a Bengal. Honestly, he's one of the guys I think about the most, of just being 3 years too early. Had he been there for the bulk of the Marvin Lewis era, he probably would have been a household name. I think he was in the NFL circles for NFL fans. Everyone knows who TKO Spikes was. He had a fantastic name. TKO would go up on the board when he make a hit, right? But he would go on to never play a playoff game in his career, and the Bengals would have success right after he left. And that's, a guy like that playing, I think he played like 15 or 16 years in the NFL, had a lot of success everywhere he went. He was pretty durable. He was a sure tackler, racked up tackles all the time, but made high-end impact plays pretty routinely in his short career with the Bengals that you look at it and you go, man, he could have been a Ring of Honor, maybe the best linebacker they've ever had he have seen it through. And I think I made those same comments when we did the 100 greatest Bengals of all time. But to me, when I went back and cut that up last summer, I fell even more for Takeo Spikes. Like, oh my God, this guy was an absolute freak show and could have played it in any era, whether it be the super physical eras to all the way till now. And he pretty much did span this 25 years. But what I mean is he could have run and cover, but he could be physical. He was a smart player. He was a leader and a lot of stops throughout his NFL career because he played all over Philly, Chargers, Bills. And I think there was another stop in there as well that I don't remember. But definitely, I think talent-wise, probably the most talented linebacker they've ever had. And in this 25-year period, without a doubt. Now, the other flip side of that, starting next to him is Vontaze Burfict. Probably, I don't even say probably. I think his peak 2.5 years were the best linebacker play we've seen in modern Bengals history. So I'm thinking 80s up, 90s, definitely 2000s, and on from that. He's undrafted out of Arizona State. Arizona, knowing him coming out of college, because like this is the time I'm doing scouting at this point. He was a freak, physical, toughness, nastiness, just would intimidate. That's the word. He was an intimidator on the field in college. And there's like a famous picture of him standing like over the center, pointing at the quarterback that I loved watching when he was coming out. And I remember watching his highlights and tapes and games and going like, what a stud this guy is. He didn't look like he lacked any athleticism. He didn't look like he lacked anything. He would run through guys 100 miles an hour and absolutely clear people consistently coming out. And then he goes to the combine and absolutely bombs it. And they say like character reviews, everything is terrible. I even think he left the combine early. He doesn't get drafted. But because Marvin Lewis has a connection with Arizona State, he convinces Burfict to come to Cincinnati as an undrafted free agent. And everyone's like, oh, like Marvin's been looking for his Ray Lewis for a long time. And if he can get Burfict straight, this guy's going to be good. It didn't take long. Like we're talking from undrafted to starting in your rookie year. Injuries happened and things had to open up a path. Guy we should mention, Thomas Howard, doesn't make this honorable mention list because he didn't play enough games. I think he only played 16 games with the Bengals. Thomas Howard was good for that 1 year, and then one game and gets hurt, and that was the last time we'd ever see him. And I believe he's passed away since then. So rest in peace, Thomas Howard. And if I'm wrong, then I'm sorry. But I believe he has. But Burfict gets in, steps in. Instantly, you're like, whoa, this dude is good. Year two, he is fantastic. And I think people misunderstand Vontaze Burfict so much, especially from the outside. And I was super critical of Burfict towards the end of his time in Cincinnati. And I'm going to try and marry the two thoughts of what I want to say here. On the one hand, people do not realize how smart he was. Football smart, intelligence, anticipation, reading things, reacting, getting to plays before they happen. Burfict was fantastic at that. He had such an innate feel for the game and understanding of the game and how offenses were trying to attack his defense and how he could exploit it and make plays in big moments. He was very, very good at that because he wasn't a great athlete. I think we saw a glimpse of it at the combine, but at the same time, I think that was more of his conditioning and preparation. And you could tell like this may be an issue for him. But on the field, you didn't see or sense that lack of athleticism because he got to play so quickly that most guys weren't reading and reacting and getting to. And of course, he was powerful and nasty and brought a physical element to a team that desperately needed it. This team was led by Andy Dalton, AJ Green, Geno Atkins. 3 of the quietest Pro Bowl star players. In Dalton, I'm stretching there, but he was a Pro Bowl player. He's your quarterback. He should be one of the faces of your franchise, right? Those are 3 of the quietest cornerstone players you could absolutely have. So you need to absorb the personality of, I believe in this theory, that you either absorb the personality of the head coach, quarterback, or the strongest defensive personality. So if you end up with a team that's a bunch of quiet guys and doesn't really, go crazy, the Marvin Lewis led teams were kind of quiet. Marvin was known for being quiet a lot of times. Apparently he was different behind the scenes, but from what we saw. And then you insert Vontaze Burfict. And it took about a year, and then he controlled that entire defense. And he brought a physicality to that defense that they were lacking. And instantly they were like, here are the keys, Vontaze. If you play the way you've been playing and you play with that aggressiveness, we will follow you. And of course, it culminated in him overstepping boundaries. New rules were starting to come in place. Player safety was starting to come in place. And this is right at the tail end of the James Harrison. Like, he was just as crazy as Burfict was, spearing guys and wrecking careers. And Burfict was on the tail end of that. And in the middle of that, they were like, enough of this. We're going to start fining, suspending, big time flags for unnecessary roughness and hits to the head and, so on. Burfict struggled to adjust. And it was his identity. It was one of the pillars of his game. If he wasn't playing with that physical intimidation factor, he wasn't as good. And so the final couple of years, he wasn't as good. He was suspended. He was fined. The penalties were hurting the team. And ultimately, they released him. And he couldn't recreate that in his career. And again, maybe the conditioning part caught up to him again. And he played heavier towards the end. And then with the Raiders at Oakland, right? I think it was Oakland at the time still. But Burfict, for that stretch, so good. And I'd love to start him next to Takeo Spikes if you can screw his head on and keep him straight. Now, if he bubbles over for this 25-year team, there's a lot of talking about Burfict there. I spent like 5 minutes on that because he's one of the more intriguing players we've ever had. Had he played in the 80s or 90s, he's in someone's Ring of Honor or now Hall of Fame. Had he played for the Steelers at any point, they would have loved him, absolutely loved him. They built a statue outside of Acrisure, Heinz, whatever the stadium's called now. They would have loved Vontaze Burfict in Pittsburgh. But if he bubbles over and you can't control him, the next either guy here you can insert is Brian Simmons or Logan Wilson. And that's a very, very good backup situation. And if you're going to 3 linebacker sets, because I think more Burfict inside, I would put Brian Simmons out there as one of my outside linebackers. He and Takeo Spikes, and then Burfict inside. And I think you're completely fine. Burfict played a lot of outside linebacker as well because Ray Maluga was an inside linebacker. But again, this gets very transition of the NFL defenses where with 2 linebackers, and it's hard to discern who's inside and outside. It became right, left. We both have to be able to do both things. But with Brian Simmons, drafted same year as Takeo Spike, spending 2 first-round picks on linebackers. They called each other soulmates, which is weird, but also cool at, 20, now 30 years later, like, oh, that's pretty cool that they felt that way about each other, that they had that type of connection, that they saw each other as brothers, instantly. And they played so well together, Takeo Spikes and Brian Simmons. And that's, you could argue, give me Simmons and Spikes because their connection was so good. They had almost a symbiotic relationship watching early games. I thought linebacker looked like this all the time when I was a kid. I'm like, when I'm 13, 14, I'm like, yeah, that's what linebacker looks like. Of course it does. It does not for the rest of our Bengals history. It's hard to get those two together. Those two were so good together. You got a couple pairings, Burfict and Maluga, Logan Wilson, Jermaine Pratt. Maluga doesn't make this roster. We'll talk about him. But a couple pairings here. And maybe that's key to getting really great linebacker play, is to give him a good player next to him that he trusts, understands, and can work with. And that's how you get the best of both guys here. But Brian Simmons was athletic, smart, calmer demeanor than Takeo Spikes. Could move in coverage, I think, and get to depths that I didn't think Spikes could get to. Spikes is a little clunkier, boxier, like when he ran. Simmons is smoother and better athlete in that way, but both athletic in different ways. If they both ran a 4.55, they'd get there at the same time, but they'd look differently getting there, if that makes sense. Simmons not as physical as Spikes, but maybe a more secure, conservative angle taker that didn't get beat as often as Spikes would, because Spikes would get there and sometimes be out of control a little bit. But I mean, I liked it. That's part of playing linebacker. He could definitely start on this roster, no doubt about it. The linebackers, surprisingly, are pretty good for this 25-year team. Logan Wilson, currently, they're I think Logan Wilson's probably going to be a captain on this 2025 team. I think all of these guys have been captains at some point. Yeah, I think they all have, of the starters we have here in orange. Logan Wilson, I think, will be a captain this year. We're talking about a guy that is athletic, has okay speed, but great fluidity. You know, he's part of the new age linebackers where they're all decently athletic. They're not freak shows like Takeo Spikes. Wilson's definitely more athletic than perfect. He's probably comparable to Brian Simmons in a lot of ways. Simmons is probably faster than Logan Wilson is, but in terms of smoothness, change of direction, moving between traffic, I think Logan Wilson and Brian Simmons are very similar players. Wilson, great ball skills, right? This guy's got his hands on the ball a ton in his career. Last year he did not, and I think that's why people thought he fell off. Wilson's not playing as well because he's not making those big plays. Hopefully this year they can get him back to that, making those, because I think that really impacts not just the game, but people's perception of how well they played. Because I went back and I've watched a lot of 2024 season now. There's a couple games I'd like to finish up before the summer's done as we approach training camp. I thought Wilson played good because by this time he's already out. I thought Wilson played good in 2024 on review. And Jermaine Pratt, probably the most controversial of this group. You may say, give me Ray Malaluga. I can see some people saying that. You may say, just give me 4 linebackers and let's go with an extra defensive lineman, tight end, whatever. But Jermaine Pratt, for the amount of plays he made, impact plays, clutch moment plays, playing inside outside, being able to run and cover in man coverage, being able to defend the run. Early in his career, he was as sure of a tackler as I've watched of Bengals teams. His vice grip hands, he got a hand on a guy, they were going down. And he lost that. He lost that flexibility. He lost that ability to close on these ball carriers. And obviously, I heard him at the end, and I don't want that to paint our picture of what Jermaine Pratt was. Jermaine Pratt was a very good linebacker for the Bengals for a while. And yeah, it's maybe my opinion of him is probably carried by the 2021 season where he was very good, and the playoffs where he was very, very good. We always talk about Logan Wilson's, and we should mention it here, Super Bowl performance could have been the MVP of that game. He would have been in the running had the Bengals won. He probably wouldn't have won it because he's a linebacker, but that last play that he gets penalized on, Logan Wilson did nothing wrong. We'll hold that forever. Pratt, I've watched the game, since then. I've watched it. I don't want to say recently because I want to say it was April or March. Pratt was equally as good. The Bengals run defense was so good that game. And Pratt and Wilson, I don't think they've had a better game combined than that Super Bowl game. They almost won that thing for them. And he deserves to be remembered as that player rather than who he was the final year and some change. Guys who didn't make the list worth mentioning. Ray Malaluga, absolute nut job. He and Burfict. Can you imagine they had Ray Malaluga, Vontaze Burfict, and James Harrison for a year together at linebacker? Like, good God. Like, they're just trying to crush the opponents into submission, just like we've had enough. These guys are just one of the most physical players the Bengals have ever had, Ray Malaluga. Now, couldn't cover, couldn't run, very stiff, very slow, but coming downhill, taking on fullbacks. This is when you needed a guy to take on fullbacks back in the day. It wasn't that long ago. But Ray Malaluga would do it. You would see some crazy hits, lead blockers, and Malaluga just, I imagine, just sparks and explosions and dust, 3 yards in a cloud of dust. He was definitely good for that. He was a battering ram at linebacker. Missed tackles because he ran with his head down. Still a fun player. He's a guy I thought many Bengals fans, when he was drafted, I celebrated hard when they drafted Ray Malaluga. Coming out of USC, he was good, and he made a lot of plays. And I didn't care about the limitations, right, athletically. I was like, second round? This guy's good. And the limitations were why he never became a great player. Instead, his peak was probably good player. A lot of average in there because of the limitations, but I still enjoy Ray Malaluga a ton. Vinny Ray, he became a captain as well, I believe, but one of the underrated role players in the last 25 years. If you could get him on the practice squad in this, I would love to have him on the roster. I think he's still team chaplain of the current team, if I remember correctly. I remember he was a couple years ago. I haven't looked at the staff recently to see if he is or not. But Vinny Ray was an undrafted guy out of Duke, not the biggest, not the most athletic, good at everything, could do everything, was a good special teams guy. You could see it in his first couple of years, like, man, this guy's a very good special teams player. Probably like a Shaka Hayward and Mama John Meta right now. Maybe they turn into a Vinny Ray in a couple of years. But Ray had to step in because they had injuries at linebacker. I think Ray Maluga was the first injury they had. And Ray stepped in. You're like, this guy's, he's okay. You can see the limitations. You can see he's not the most physical, but he continued to make plays. He was a solid tackler. He would come up with these tip balls in the air pretty routinely. He had long arms for being short, and he ran kind of funny. He ran with his arms out, but at the same time, he was a fine player, a fill-in player that could play all three linebacker spots, and never had an issue getting out of a game with Vinny Ray stepping in there. He's definitely worth a mention here. He had a lot of big moments. But for special teams as well, if you need like a core special teams player and you wanted to keep that fifth guy to be that over like a Jermaine Pratt, say you're really building this roster out, I could see you saying, give me Vinny Ray over Jermaine Pratt. He'll lead our special teams unit and be the guy. Last guy I want to mention here at linebacker is Brandon Johnson. You may not remember Brandon Johnson. This is, again, another undrafted, low-end guy that the Bengals, they draft Keith Rivers, and they're trying to figure out who's going to play this position. Is because Rivers at the time is slow to get on the field. I think it was a contract dispute, and then gets injured early in his career. Brandon Johnson steps in there, and he was a really good cover linebacker. It's like, whoa, this guy can actually play. And he did play for a little bit. And I always had an appreciation for the guys that could just step in. The Vinny Rays, the Brandon Johnsons. We don't have many of those guys. I feel like undrafted, to get three guys here undrafted, Vinny Ray, Brandon Johnson, Vontaze Burfict, which Burfict should have been drafted based on talent and what he ended up being, says a lot about the linebacker position, that sometimes that's a very hard one to evaluate. And if I look over my 17 years of trying to do this in a semi-professional level, linebacker's been a very difficult position for me and continues to be because it's not, college game is different the most, I think, at linebacker than it is in the NFL. And so it's hard to really know who's going to come out of that. A lot of times, give me the guy who's physical, not afraid, and athletic. And I feel like, give me a shot there. Give me that roll of the dice. But the undrafted guys do come out a ton, or those late round picks do come out on top a ton. I like keeping the five we do have on the roster, though. Spikes, Burfict, Simmons, Wilson, Pratt. I think that is good. I think that stands up to any of these other positions. Maybe not receiver, maybe not quarterback, but it stands up to running back. It stands up to tight end. It stands up to some of the parts of the offensive line. You maybe not two Hall of Famers like we have at both tackle spots, but it's up there with the defensive line too. Maybe you don't have your Geno Atkins here, although Spikes and Burfict, man, the high-end play that they provided at times, comparable to a lot of these guys. They just didn't. The reason you end up in a Ring of Honor or the Hall of Fame is because you do it for 5 to 10 to 12, 15 years, where many of these guys did not. Brian Simmons a long time with the Bengals. Logan Wilson will hit a long time with the Bengals, but Burfict didn't. Spikes didn't. Pratt, about right. Ultimately cut in that final year of his contract. But where did I go wrong here? Would you have Shayne Graham over Evan McPherson? Any return man I may have missed? There's got a bunch of guys have returned. Charlie Jones has 2 returns. Glenn Holt had a return. Tab Perry. Is there someone I'm missing? I'm sure I am. There's a lot of guys who've had big returns in Bengals history. Bernard Scott could have been on that list. I may have named them all. I wish I left them up for you guys in the comments. And who would you start at linebacker out of this group? Remember, we're trying to find 2 good starters to mesh together. May that influence your decision. And then who would be your third guy? The last episode of the series, the next episode on the 25-year team, we'll do corners and safeties together, keeping 10 of them, but a ton of complementary players to talk about, a ton of honorable mentions. At least know Pacman Jones is going to make that roster because of his returnability, but because he was a good player as well. We'll talk about him on the next episode of Bengals on the Brain, presented by First Star Logistics. Until next time, Houday.
Bengals fans, tired of the same old post-game chatter? Want real insight beyond the scoreboard? Then you need Bengals on the Brain with Joe Goodberry, presented by First Star Logistics. Joe Goodberry isn't just a fan, he's a die-hard Bengals football analyst. Every week, Joe dives deep into the Bengals game film, breaking down the plays that mattered, revealing hidden strategies, and uncovering the true impact of individual performances. Get ready for post-game analysis like you've never heard before, player evaluations that go beyond the stats, and the most in-depth Bengals draft coverage on the internet. Don't just watch the Bengals, understand the Bengals. Subscribe to Bengals on the Brain with Joe Goodberry on the First Star Media Group's YouTube channel. Get smart, get obsessed, get Bengals on the Brain.